Hello everybody, I'm Carl Schoof and I'm excited to present to you the TimelineLite Ultimate Starter Guide, exclusively available on ActiveTouch Plus. In this series, I'm going to be walking you through the features of TimelineLite that will allow you to create programmatic animations that are infinitely powerful and flexible. In this first session, I'm going to introduce you to TimelineLite by showing you some examples, explaining the different features, and giving you a brief code overview. So, starting out, let's just talk about what TimelineLite is. TimelineLite is an integral part of the GreenSock Tweening Platform. TimelineLite and its older brother TweenLite allow you to essentially group your TweenMax or TweenLite tweens together so that you can control them as a whole. You can play an animation, pause an animation, reverse an animation, speed up an animation, and do a whole number of things to your group of tweens. So in order to understand TimelineLite, it's really imperative that you have some background with TweenLite or TweenMax. Now I'm going to show you some of TimelineLite in action. And here in my browser I have a Swift open. I'm just going to refresh it and you'll see that we have a series of tweens that play. Nothing really too crazy is happening except for maybe that starburst that I have here. But all those tweens play in succession. And since they're inside of a TimelineLite, I can very easily speed up that animation, slow it down, and also attach a slider component to it so that I can scrub through the progress of that entire animation. And you can see that I can scrub that animation backwards. I can watch that de-glow effect where the stars come out of the text. I can do that frame by frame if I like, and go all the way up to the beginning. So the first thing that happens is that text fades in, the line comes across, expands into a box, and then some text comes down. Now, we've talked about TimelineLite being able to sequence your tweens, and you might think, well, that just means play one after another. Well, the thing is that we can have our tweens stagger and overlap however we want. And if I scrub back to this point in time where the text starts coming in, you'll see that tweens are happening concurrently at the same time. So while that first piece of text is still coming in, the next part comes in before it finishes. So it's not just sequencing one after another. There can be overlapping and staggering going on that you have precise control over. Okay, so next I want to show you, just like I did this whole starburst effect here, where we have just a series of those stars coming in here. I use that same effect plenty of times because I use TimelineLite as a particle engine of sorts. And here I have a bubbles demo where you can see that I hit play and you'll see these bubbles start to rise. Each bubble has its own size, its own blurriness, its own alpha, and its own speed and its own wiggle. And all these hundreds of bubbles are just playing over and over again. Well, when that animation is done, I can reverse the entire thing. So this was built by nesting TimelineLites inside of a larger TimelineLite. Each bubble animation is its own timeline that gets sequenced along with all the others. And while it's playing forwards or even backwards, I can pause that entire animation at any time. I can reverse it, or I can play it forward, or I can pause it. So you have an incredible amount of control. Also with TimelineLite, we have the ability to add labels to our timelines, very much like you would do in the Flash IDE. So here I have a very basic timeline that has 3 tweens in it. We're tweening the character from home to school, then school to work, and work to movies. So each point in the timeline has a label. And if I click on the Movies button, TimelineMax gives me a tween to method, which allows me to tween to any label in my timeline. So I can play through the whole thing, or if I click on school, I go through work and then to school. Now, in the Flash IDE timeline, with movie clips, you have go to and play or go to and stop. You don't have control for play to a certain frame. So TimelineMax gives you that sort of control. My last example here is something I built for Snorkel TV called my Bulletproof TimelineMax navigation. And here we have a little Swift that has 4 different sections. And this entire little demo here is one timeline. And each section has its own very unique animation as far as building and also when it transitions on the way out. So if I'm in recent post and click to home, you'll see the animation is different than when that section built in. Once home builds and I go to about, it tweens out in a different way. So at any point in the animation, while something is tweening in, I can go to another section, and the current section will tween out in a specific way. And this example here uses a lot of the more advanced features of TimelineMax, but in order to get here, you need to start with the basics. So this TimelineLite Ultimate Starter Guide is going to walk you through step one of setting up your timeline, talking about the basic methods and properties, and through about 6 videos, I'm going to talk you through a whole bunch of the features that you'll need to know. Moving forward, I want to take you over to the GreenSock homepage. Now again, in order to use TimelineLite or Max effectively, you really need to have some background in TweenLite and TweenMax. Here's another example of TimelineMax in action, where this entire animation on the GreenSock homepage, I didn't let you sit through the whole thing yet, you can scrub the entire thing. And this takes my example and blows it out of the water. There's so much happening here, but it's all programmatic animation that can be controlled. And so since we can control it, we can scrub through it. So once I saw this in action, it blew my mind, and I knew that I had to learn TimelineLite. When you're on the GreenSock page, Jack Doyle's done a great job of documenting TimelineLite and TimelineMax. And there are some great demos here that I suggest that you do a little homework and play around with. So do some reading, and you can play with his TimelineLite interactive demo here, where you can scrub through some timelines and see some of the code. I'm going to walk you through some of my own code shortly, and as much as I learn from reading these resources and playing around with interactive demos, sometimes it just helps me to have somebody just explain it to me, and so I can see it being built into action step by step. So that's really going to be the point of this starter guide. I'm going to walk you through everything and explain the difference between append, prepend, insert multiple, append multiple, and we're going to get all that confusion out of the way. And although this tutorial is going to focus on TimelineLite, we are also going to be touching on TimelineMax, TimelineLite's older brother. TimelineMax extends TimelineLite and gives you additional features. Most notably is the ability to repeat your timeline. And here we have an interactive demo that you guys can visit and play around with. So, if you're also curious, I'm going to show you a little bit of the documentation real quick. Everything Jack Doyle does is documented extensively. And again, I'm just going to be here to demystify these various properties and methods and compare and contrast some of them so you know exactly which tools to use for the job at hand. I'm going to be jumping into Flash really quickly to show you in code the benefits of using TimelineLite. Before we do that, just 2 quick words. One is that we will be using the GreenSock Tweening Platform library, and you can download the AS3 version of that on virtually any page of the GreenSock site. Now, I'm going to assume that you have used GreenSock before, so I'm not going to talk a lot about how to save the files and put them next to your FLA. ActiveTuts Plus has an excellent article on how to use an external library in your Flash projects, and I'm going to be using Flash Pro CS5, and all my code will be done in a document class. And if that is new to you, please check out how to use a document class in Flash. Another great article by ActiveTuts Plus and their author Michael James Williams. Let's get on to Flash. Here in Flash I have an FLA opened up where I have a series of movie clips. I have platform MC, line 1 MC, line 2 MC, and URL MC. And these movie clips are all going to animate in sequence powered by TweenLite. I'm not using TimelineLite yet. And let's just give this a little bit of a whirl. And you'll see that all of these objects animate to where I have them on the stage, okay? So the logo scales up, line 1 slides in, line 2 slides in, and then the URL scaled up as well. Now this is all being controlled, like I said, by TweenLite, and I'm using a document class called Basic Sequence, and I'm going to jump over to that file right now. And we have just a very standard document class set up where I am importing the GreenSock classes, but nothing that you haven't done before. And we also have some variables declared that reference those instances on the stage. And inside my init function here, I just have a series of TweenLites. Now, every TweenLite is going to start exactly when it is created. So technically, all of these tweens would happen at the same time, but what's happening is each one of them has a delay. So the first tween that takes platform MC and scales it from a scale x of 0.5 and a scale y of 0.5 and alpha of 0 is going to have a duration of 1 second. When line 1 slides in, you'll see that it has a delay of 1. So it's waiting for the previous tween to finish. And so on and so forth. The last tween has a delay of 3. So that is the sum of the durations of all the previous tweens. So this code works just fine for getting each element to animate in sequence. Where we run into trouble is when we need to adjust that timing after the fact. Let's say I want line 1 to take 4 seconds. We'll make it ridiculously long. I'm going to save this file and test. And what you'll see is that the next line doesn't wait, nor does Earl MC wait. Okay, they come in too early. So what I would have to do in this case is every time I change this duration, I then need to say, oh, what's this delay going to be now? Well, it's 1 plus 4 equals 5. And this delay here is 1 plus 4 is 5 plus 1 equals 6. And you know what? I can do that with whole numbers when there's only 3 or 4 of them. But you know, if you have 12 tweens going on and they're 0.5 seconds in duration, 0.2 seconds in duration, that math gets really kind of scary. So I can test this now, and by making 3 or 4 changes, I got the effect to work, where that tween takes a super long time, then the next 2 come right in. Well, we don't want to have to deal with that. Another thing that's very difficult with this method is, what if we have everything absolutely perfect, and then our art director comes in with his fancy shoes, and he's like, you know what? It's great. I just want it to be a little bit quicker. A little bit quicker? What does that mean? Well, that means your life is miserable, because you have to then take each one of these durations and delays and refactor them. You might, to make it quicker, you have to make the durations smaller. So you might say, okay, well, let's make that 0.8 and this one 3.6, and it becomes very difficult. If he said make it twice as fast, you know, we would take the durations and cut them all in half. Well, it's still a lot of work. So what I'm going to do is paste in some code from a very secret magical file that I have that's going to make all of these sort of changes very easy. And we're going to start using TimelineLite. So first things first, I'm going to go up to the top of this document class, and I'm going to set up a new public var that I can use. I'm going to call it timeline, and it is going to be a TimelineLite. You'll see that Flash CS5 gives me code completion because I'm already importing the GreenSock package. And I'm just going to do that, and that's all I need to do. And down in my init function, I'm going to get rid of all this code here, and I'm going to do a magic paste. There we go. The first thing I'm doing here is that I'm telling my timeline var that it's going to reference a newly created TimelineLite. And then I have a series of append methods that I'm using on that new timeline. And each append simply takes a singular TweenLite and adds it to my timeline. Okay, you'll notice that a lot of the code over here is exactly the same as what I was using the old way. You will notice though that there are no delays set. So what the append method does is it says, okay, add this tween here to the end of the timeline. So when we get to the second tween, it says, all right, this line 1 MC tween that I have going on, it's going to happen right after the previous tween. And so they all get added in succession. So I'm going to save this real quick, and when we test it, you're going to see that here we have our series of tweens. It's one after the other. Well, now that everything is stored in a timeline, and since all these tweens are appended and they naturally now follow each other, I can take that first tween that I have for platform MC, and I can say, you know what, I'm going to make your duration 5 seconds long, and I'm not going to change anything else in any of the tweens. All right, they'll naturally just play, they'll wait for that to happen. And then once it's done, boom, boom, boom. Okay, great. Now, what if I wanted to say, all right, let's just bring that back to normal. I could take each one of these lines and I could make them a little bit shorter, 0.5, 0.5. And again, that's not going to harm me at all. They're just going to happen very quickly. Now back to my other situation that I had with the TweenLite stacked up. If I love this animation, but I wanted to make it twice as fast, well, inside the constructor of my TimelineLite, I can pass in a series of properties for my timeline. And I can set the timescale property to be 2. And that means play it twice as fast. So we're going to save that, and then now all of that timing works, but it's just quicker. Now you may notice when I'm testing this Swift sometimes that there's a little bit of a lag initially. Well, that's just the garbage collection kicking in on the Flash player. If you test your Swift, in a browser, you'll see that it plays wicked fast. It's like butter. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. So there we have a series of tweens all appended to a TimelineLite, and I just adjusted the timescale property of that TimelineLite to make it play twice as fast. If I want to make it play at half speed, I can set the timescale to 0.5. So I'll save that and we'll test it out, and now everything is in slow motion. Alright, so it's very easy to make that sort of a global change. Furthermore, let's say I wanted to delay this whole animation. I didn't want it to start until maybe 2 seconds after my Swift loads. I can just put a delay on the TimelineLite in the constructor, and now I'll test my Swift, hum-de-hum, 2 seconds later, everything starts playing. So these are just some of the features that TimelineLite is going to give us. And again, we're going to talk about all the constructor properties and all the different methods like prepend, insert, insert multiple, append multiple in section 2 and on of this video series. Right now I just want to highlight some of the main advantages once you start putting your tweens inside of a TimelineLite. Another thing to keep in mind too is that when we're using append, it's not just about something happening one after the other. I don't have to wait for line 1 MC to finish its animation before line 2 MC comes on. What I can do is add another parameter to the append method. Right now the tween is the first thing that's going into the append method, but I can also add an offset. And if I make this a positive number, let's just say 2 seconds, that means there's going to be a 2-second delay between the previous tween ending and this tween here starting. So let me just show you that. Oh, I still have that big delay on there. 1, 2, boom. All right, my counting's off. But there, it wasn't just one after the other. There was a 2-second pause. Well, check this out. I could say, let's do negative 0.8. All right, so that means that this tween is going to begin 0.8 seconds before this tween ends. So this is really cool because now I can start overlapping things. And remember, I'm not changing any delays or going through every tween and monkeying around with things. And if we watch this play one more time, let me just get rid of that initial delay right there, or make it very short. You'll see that both lines come in with just a short stagger. Droom. Okay? It's not one and then the other. And I can do the same thing for the URL MC. I could say, you know what, I want you to come in a little bit earlier too, and I can give you a negative offset of 0.5. And again, you can tweak all these numbers, but the thing is, by changing one tween doesn't mean you necessarily have to change a zillion other tweens that you're using. So that's just a brief overview of some of the things we can do with TimelineLite and why we would want to do them. I'm super excited about this opportunity to present this information to you through ActiveTouch Plus, and stay tuned because very soon we're going to be diving into all this code line by line, and I'll be explaining many of the properties and methods of TimelineLite in the TimelineLite Ultimate Starter Guide. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll catch you very soon.